gate was not a complicated assignment. One road in, one road out. A boom barrier painted yellow and white, a guard shack with a space heater that made a sound like a dying engine, and a checkpoint log that had not flagged a serious incident in 14 months. Lieutenant Derek Pruitt had worked this post for 11 of those months, and he had learned, or believed he had learned, everything a man needed to know about this job in the first 3 weeks. He knew vehicles. He knew rank insignia. He knew the difference between a contractor, a dependent spouse, a visiting officer, and someone who had wandered off the highway by mistake. He knew it the way some men know weather, by feel, by shape, by the confidence that comes from never having been wrong in a way that cost him anything. The woman who pulled up in the gray civilian pickup at 7-2 did not fit any category he recognized. She was Native American. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. No rank on her jacket. No base sticker on the windshield. No visible ID lanyard. She wore a field jacket over a dark flannel shirt, the collar up against the cold that rolled down off the mountain in the early morning like something with weight. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was still. She did not look nervous. She did not look in a hurry. She looked at the barrier, then at him, and waited. Pruitt stepped out of the shack. "This is a restricted installation," he said. "Credentialed personnel and authorized vehicles only." She did not answer immediately. She looked at him the way you look at a sign you have already read. "I have business inside," she said. He almost smiled. "Ma'am?" He said it the way men say it when they mean something else. "I'm going to need you to turn around and use the public access road back to the highway. This is not a visitor facility." She reached toward the dashboard. He put his hand up. "Keep your hands where I can see them." She stopped, looked at him again. Then, slowly, she reached into the inside pocket of the field jacket and produced a card. She held it out through the window. He did not take it immediately. He took it. The card was not new. The edges were worn flat, the surface dull in a way that suggested years of being slid in and out of the same pocket. It was the kind of ID that looked like it had been carried the way a tool is carried, not displayed, not protected, used. Pruitt turned it over once, checked the photo, checked the name. Mara Calder. He looked at her, looked at the card again. "This expired," he said. "Flip it." He flipped it. The second card was behind the first, tucked flat against it, the way a spare key rides behind a primary. Newer, stiffer. A different color band across the top. He read the line below her name and photograph. He read it a second time. He did not read it a third time. He had already understood it. He simply did not want to be understood understanding it. United States Marine Corps, Marine Raider Battalion, honorably separated veteran. Below that, a second line in smaller print, in a font that did not belong on a standard veteran ID card. An authorization code, a department designation, and a contact number that began with an area code Pruitt associated from a briefing he had sat through and half ignored 2 years ago, with the Inspector General's office out of the Pentagon. He looked up. The woman in the gray pickup was watching him with the same expression she had worn since she pulled up. Still, not expectant, not impatient. She was watching him the way you watch a machine run a process you already know the output of. Behind him, 2 of his soldiers had drifted closer to the shack window. They had seen the card from 20 feet away. They had not seen what was on it, but they had seen his face. His face was doing something he could not control. "This says," he started. "I know what it says," she said. He could have opened the barrier. That was the correct move, and some part of him, the part that had sat through enough JAG briefings to recognize a credentialing chain he did not outrank, knew it. The boom barrier was 12 feet of painted aluminum. It went up in 4 seconds. He had raised it 400 times. He did not raise it. "I'm going to need to verify this," he said. "Standard protocol. You're going to need to pull to the secondary lane and wait while I run the authorization." "Run it," she said. "It may take some time. I'll wait." He walked back to the shack. His 2 soldiers stepped aside without being asked. He picked up the desk phone. Not the radio, the phone, because the radio was open, and he did not want this conversation on an open channel, and dialed the base admin desk. It rang 4 times. Someone picked up. "This is Lieutenant Pruitt at the main gate. I have a..." He paused, looked through the window at the gray truck. "I have an individual presenting a veteran ID with what appears to be an IG authorization attachment. I need someone to verify the access level." A pause on the other end. "Can you read me the authorization code?" He read it. A longer pause. "Lieutenant, can you hold?" He held. Through the window, he could see Mara Calder had not moved. She had not checked her phone. She had not adjusted her mirror or looked at the mountain or done any of the things people do when they are waiting and want the waiting to be over. She sat with both hands visible on the steering wheel, engine running, and looked at the barrier. Like she had done this before. Like she had been made to wait before, at gates not unlike this one, by men not unlike him. The phone clicked. A different voice came on. "Lieutenant Pruitt." It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "Do not process that authorization at the gate level. Do not log it in the standard checkpoint record. And do not, under any circumstances, ask that individual to leave. Do you understand me?" Pruitt's hand tightened on the phone. "Yes, sir," he said again, but the voice had already gone. He came back out of the shack with the posture of a man who had decided that what he had just heard on the phone was not necessarily the end of his authority at this gate. The cold hit him as the door swung open. The mountain behind the installation pushed wind down the access road in the mornings, a steady pressure that smelled of pine resin and frozen ground. He pulled his collar up, walked back to the truck. She had not moved. "Ma'am," he stopped at the driver's window. "I've made a call to admin. There's a process for non-standard authorizations, and I need to follow it. I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. Not a question. A word placed between them like a stone. Protocol. When an authorization can't be verified at the gate level, "It was verified," she said. "Whoever you called told you that. I can see it in how you're standing." He felt his jaw tighten. Behind him, he was aware of his soldiers. Specialist Torrance and PFC Delgado. Both of them pretending to check the vehicle log. Both of them watching. There was also a sergeant from the motor pool who had pulled up in a utility cart to drop off paperwork and was now not leaving. Pruitt had an audience. He had not planned for an audience. "Step out of the vehicle," he said again, lower this time. "Lieutenant." Her voice did not rise, did not tighten. "I drove 4 hours to get to this gate. I was told to report by 07:30. It is currently 07:01. I have shown you my identification. You have spoken to whoever told you not to log my authorization in the standard record, and you are still standing outside my window asking me to step out of my vehicle." She paused. "What exactly do you think happens next?" He had no clean answer to that. He pointed at the secondary lane anyway. If you've watched enough of these stories, you already know what that gesture cost him. Leave your read in the comments. Was this the moment it was over, or did it go further than that? I have very little patience for people who confuse quiet with weakness. Not because quiet is easy. It is not. Quiet, real quiet, the kind that holds under direct pressure from someone with a rank bar and a bad read on the room, costs something. It costs the same thing every time. The choice not to correct them yet. The choice to let the gap between what they believe and what is true keep widening on its own until the width of it becomes the punishment. Mara Calder did not raise her voice at that gate. She did not argue the regulation. She did not reach for her phone. She pulled to the secondary lane, cut the engine, and waited with both hands on the steering wheel and her eyes on the mountain. The same mountain she had read terrain reports on 3 weeks ago. In a room 2,000 miles away, at a desk stacked with incident files that the people inside this installation believed no longer existed. She had been trained in environments where the wrong reaction cost lives. A gate in the mountain cold was not that. A lieutenant with a bad habit of reading people by their jacket was not that. She could wait. What she could not do, what she had been specifically, formally, and in writing directed not to do, was announce the scope of her authorization to anyone below the rank of 06 before the colonel made contact. So she waited. The wind came off the mountain in a long, flat push that rocked the truck once and then settled. She watched Pruitt walk back to the shack, watched Torrance and Delgado go back to their log, watched the sergeant in the utility cart pretend to find something interesting in his own paperwork. They were all watching her. She knew that. She had been watched before. Inside the shack, Pruitt was not doing well. The admin desk had transferred him to a duty officer, who had transferred him to someone at the installation's legal office, who had listened to the authorization code, asked him to repeat it, and then told him, with the particular flatness of someone reading from a document while trying not to show that the document alarmed them, that the authorization was valid and that the presenting individual was to be granted unescorted access to the installation proper. Unescorted, not visitor escorted, not contractor supervised. Unescorted access, the kind of access that outranked the checkpoint entirely. Pruitt pressed, "What's the nature of the visit?" "I'm not authorized to provide that information at your level, Lieutenant." "Who is authorized?" A pause. "Colonel Stahl has been notified. He is en route." The call ended. Pruitt set the phone down and looked through the smudged window of the shack at the gray truck in the secondary lane. The woman inside had not checked her phone in the 12 minutes she had been sitting there. She had not adjusted her seat. She sat in exactly the same position she had been in when she pulled over. Hands on the wheel, eyes forward, completely still in the way that certain people are still when they are not waiting for something to happen, but simply existing inside time they have already accounted for. He thought about the second card, the line beneath her name, Marine Raider Battalion. He knew what that was. Everyone at a military installation knew what that was. The Marine Raiders were the direct descendants of the OSS-era paramarine units. a special operations force operating under MARSOC, Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. Selection was brutal. The attrition rate at assessment and selection ran above 60%. The operators who made it through were not the loudest men in the room. They were, by design, the ones you did not notice until it was over. He had told this woman she had no business at this gate. He was beginning to understand that she had more business here than anyone currently inside the wire. Through the window, he watched Specialist Torrance drift toward the secondary lane with 2 cups of coffee from the shack's machine. The thin, bad coffee that no one drank voluntarily. Torrance set 1 cup on the hood of the gray truck, said something Pruitt could not hear, and walked back. The woman picked up the cup. She did not look at Pruitt. She did not need to. Specialist Torrance had been at this installation for 8 months, and in that time he had developed what he privately considered a reliable instinct for reading checkpoints. Not vehicles, people. He had seen contractors who acted like colonels, and colonels who acted like contractors. He had seen dependents who knew the regs better than the duty officer, and officers who could not find their own access codes without help. He had processed 412 entries in 8 months. He kept a count for reasons he could not fully explain, and he had learned that the first 10 seconds at the window told you almost everything you needed to know about who you were dealing with. The woman in the gray truck had told him everything in the first 2. She had not been flustered. She had not been indignant. She had not performed patience the way people perform patience when they are actually furious. The tight smile, the carefully controlled breathing, the eyes that keep flicking to the barrier and back. She had simply sat. Like the outcome was already determined, and she was giving it time to arrive. He brought her the coffee because it was cold, and because he did not know what else to do with what he was feeling, which was something close to embarrassment. Not his own, but the second-hand kind. The kind you carry when you watch someone in your unit do something you cannot undo for them. Delgado came up beside him as he walked back to the shack. What did she say? Nothing. Said thanks. That's it? That's it. Delgado was quiet for a moment. He was 22, 2 years out of basic, and he had the kind of face that showed every thought before his mouth caught up. Right now, his face was showing something between confusion and the early stages of a realization he did not have the rank to act on. Torrance, he said. That second card she had. Yeah. I saw the band on it, the color. That's not a standard vet ID. No, Torrance said. It's not. So what is it? Torrance looked at the shack. Through the window, Pruitt was on the phone again. 3rd call in 20 minutes, which was 3 more calls than this gate usually generated in a week. It's above this gate, Torrance said. That's what it is. They went back inside. Nobody said anything else, but the sergeant from the motor pool, who had still not left, set his paperwork down on the hood of his utility cart and looked at the gray truck in the secondary lane for a long moment before he started his engine. He did not drive away immediately. He sat there for another minute, watching. The colonel's vehicle came down the access road at 0731. It was a standard dark green Army sedan. No flags, no escort, no visible indication that the man inside was anything other than a senior officer running late to a morning brief. Colonel Raymond Stahl had driven himself, which was unusual, and had taken the back route from the senior officer housing area rather than the main road from the operations building. which meant he had been called at home and had not gone to his office first. That detail, the back route, the personal vehicle, the absence of an aide, was not lost on Torrance, who noted it the way young soldiers note things when they sense that the weight of a moment is above their understanding, but not above their attention. Stahl was 53. He had the face of a man who had made decisions in bad conditions and learned to live inside them without apology. His hair was cut close and going gray at the temples. He wore his uniform as if it had grown on him. No self-consciousness, no performance. He pulled the sedan to a stop just short of the barrier, got out, and looked at the gray truck in the secondary lane before he looked at anything else. He stood there for a moment. Just looked. Then he walked to the shack. Pruitt met him at the door, already at attention. "Sir." "Walk me to the vehicle," Stahl said. Not loudly, not sharply, the way you say a thing when you do not need volume to establish that it is not a suggestion. Pruitt walked. Stahl went to the driver's side of the gray truck. Mara Calder had the window down before he reached it. She had seen him coming, had read the route he took, had already set the coffee cup on the dash. "Ms. Calder," Stahl said. "Colonel, I apologize for the delay." "You didn't cause it," she said. Something moved across Stahl's face. Not quite a wince, but close. He looked at the gate. At the boom barrier still down. At Pruitt standing 3 feet behind him. At Torrance and Delgado visible through the shack window, watching with the careful attention of men who know they are witnessing something they will be asked about later. "I'm going to need to see your full packet," he said to her. "Not the access card, the operational brief." She reached into the back seat, pulled out a sealed manila envelope, handed it through the window. "If you want this channel to keep delivering stories with this kind of pressure and payoff, back it today in the pinned comment. It matters more than you think." Stahl took the envelope, did not open it yet. Looked at it for a moment, then looked at Pruitt. "Lieutenant," he said, "raise the barrier." The barrier went up. Pruitt raised it himself. Did not ask Torrance, did not delegate it, just walked to the manual override panel on the side of the shack and cranked it. The boom lifted in a slow mechanical arc, and the sound it made, a low hydraulic groan that everyone at the gate heard clearly in the cold morning air, was the kind of sound that marks a before and an after. Mara Calder pulled the gray truck through. She did not accelerate. She drove at exactly the speed the installation's internal road required, which was 15 miles per hour, which meant that everyone at the gate watched her go for a full 30 seconds before the truck rounded the first curve toward the operations cluster and disappeared behind the tree line. Stahl watched until the truck was gone. Then he turned to Pruitt. "Inside," he said. The 4 of them went into the shack. Stahl, Pruitt, Torrance, Delgado. The sergeant from the motor pool finally drove his utility cart away. The shack was not built for 4 people. It was built for 2, with a desk, a phone, a monitor, the space heater, and a rack of clipboards along one wall. Stahl did not sit. He stood in the center of the small room with the sealed envelope in both hands and looked at Pruitt. "Walk me through what happened," he said. Pruitt did, concisely. He was not a stupid man, and he knew enough to present the facts without architecture. No framing, no editorial, just the sequence. She arrived. He asked for credentials. She produced an ID. He saw the secondary card. He made calls. He placed her in the secondary lane while he verified. Stahl listened without expression. When Pruitt finished, Stahl was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sealed envelope. Then he set it on the desk, carefully the way you set something down when you want to make clear it is not going anywhere, and looked at Pruitt with an expression that was not anger exactly. It was something colder than anger. It was the look of a man doing arithmetic. "How long was she in the secondary lane?" he said. "Approximately 22 minutes, sir." 22 minutes. Stahl repeated it without inflection. She drove 4 hours from the regional hub. She was scheduled to begin her evaluation protocol at 07:30. She is now, he checked his watch, 19 minutes behind that window. Pruitt said nothing. "Do you know what her evaluation protocol covers, Lieutenant?" "No, sir." Stahl picked up the envelope, still did not open it. "You will," he said. Stahl broke the seal on the envelope with his thumb. He did not make a production of it. He slid the contents out. 3 pages, paper-clipped, with a cover sheet that carried a header Pruitt recognized from the same half-ignored briefing that had given him the area code. Office of the Inspector General, Department of Defense. Independent Operational Review. Classification: Controlled Unclassified Information. Stahl read the cover sheet. Then he read the second page. Then he went back to the cover sheet and read it again. The space heater ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the tree line with a sound like static. Pruitt watched the colonel's face and learned nothing from it. Stahl had the kind of face that had been trained over decades to give nothing away during a read. The face of a man who had sat across tables from people who were watching him for exactly this kind of information, and had decided at some point early in his career that his face was not going to be a source of intelligence for anyone, but his stillness was itself a signal. He had gone very still in the way that still things go still when the thing they are reading is worse than expected. Torrance and Delgado were standing against the wall of the shack, taking up as little space as possible, breathing as quietly as the cold would allow. Stahl set the pages down on the desk, looked at Pruitt. "I should tell you now, authority looks different when it is earned. Not louder, not harder. It takes up less space. It does not announce itself at a gate. It carries a sealed envelope and drives 4 hours before sunrise and waits in a secondary lane without complaint. Because it has done this before, and it knows, with a certainty that no rank bar can manufacture, that the waiting changes nothing about what is true. Ms. Calder," Stahl said, "is a Marine Raider Battalion veteran with 2 combat rotations and a service record that includes a Joint Service Commendation and a Combat Action Ribbon." He said it the way you read a document, flat, precise, one fact at a time. She was separated from active service following a formal complaint she filed against a superior officer. The complaint alleged procedural failure in an operational planning sequence that resulted in a mission compromise. The complaint was reviewed internally and closed without finding. He paused. "She is here," he continued, "because that closure is now under independent review. She is the reviewing officer. She has full IG liaison authority, which means she has access to every document, every record, every personnel file, and every operational log in this installation that relates to the incident in question." He looked at Pruitt. "Every document, every record." The heater ticked. The incident in question, Stahl said, is the Hartwell Canyon planning failure, 14 months ago. 14 months ago. The same 14 months in which Lieutenant Derek Pruitt had worked the main gate without a serious incident. The same 14 months in which the installation's checkpoint log had run clean. The same 14 months in which the operations building 300 meters inside the wire had processed paperwork, filed reports, and maintained a record of the Hartwell Canyon planning failure that described it, in the language of the official closure document, as a minor procedural variance with no material impact on operational outcome. That was the phrase, minor procedural variance, no material impact. Pruitt knew about Hartwell Canyon the way everyone at the installation knew about it, through the edges of conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, through the particular silence that certain senior NCOs carried when the date came up in scheduling discussions, through the fact that 2 officers who had been at this installation 14 months ago were no longer here, and their departure had not been accompanied by the usual ceremony. He had not asked questions. It was not his gate in that sense. It was not his installation in the way that some things belong to the people who carry them. It was hers. She filed the original complaint, Pruitt said. It was not a question. He was assembling it out loud because he needed to hear the shape of it. She filed it the week after the mission, Stahl said. She was the senior field analyst attached to the planning cell. She identified the sequencing error before the insertion. She flagged it through proper channels. The flag was not acted on. He paused. The mission proceeded. The sequencing error produced exactly the outcome she predicted. 3 operators were compromised. The extraction required emergency escalation. No fatalities, which is the only reason this installation still has the operational designation it has. Pruitt's hands were at his sides. He became aware of them in the way you become aware of your hands when you do not know what to do with them. The internal review closed her complaint and attributed the near miss to weather and terrain variables, Stahl said. She was separated from service 4 months later. The separation was framed as voluntary. He looked at the cover sheet again. It was not voluntary. Outside, a vehicle passed on the access road, tires on cold gravel, engine fading toward the motor pool. No one in the shack moved. The IG review was triggered, Stahl said, when a second analyst, one of the operators from the Hartwell extraction, submitted a corroborating statement 8 weeks ago. He named her. He named the flag she raised. He named the officer who closed it. He looked at Pruitt for a long moment. That officer, he said, is currently assigned to this installation. Torrance made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The involuntary kind, the kind that escapes before the body has a chance to consult the brain about whether this is an appropriate moment for noise. Delgado said nothing. He had gone the color of the shack wall. Pruitt stood very still and thought about the woman in the gray truck and the 22 minutes she had spent in the secondary lane and the 3 phone calls he had made and the specific, precise words he had used at her window. This is not a visitor facility, and the way he had pointed at the secondary lane with his index finger while his soldiers watched. The arithmetic was not complicated. He had delayed the IG's reviewing officer by 22 minutes. He had done it at a public checkpoint in front of witnesses. He had done it after being told, on a phone call he had initiated himself, not to ask her to leave. He had done it to a Marine Raider veteran with a combat action ribbon and a joint service commendation. A woman he had read as not belonging here because she had arrived in a civilian truck without rank insignia, and because she was Native American, and because she had not matched any of the categories he had filed people into over 14 months of standing at this gate. He had not thought any of that consciously. That was the problem. He had not thought it at all. He had simply acted on a read that had never been examined, in a moment that turned out to matter, in front of people who were going to remember it. "Sir," he said, "I followed verification protocol." "You followed the first half of it," Stahl said. "The half that gives you the authority to request credentials. You did not follow the second half, which is the part that tells you what to do when the credentials clear." Pruitt had no answer for that. Stahl picked up the 3 pages and squared them against the desk. Set them back in the envelope, folded the flap. "She is going to need access to the operations building, the planning cell records, and the personnel files of everyone attached to the Hartwell Canyon sequence," he said. "She is going to need that access today, unobstructed, and she is going to need it in a way that makes clear to everyone in this installation that her authority here is not in question." He looked at Pruitt one more time. "The delay at the gate is going to be in my report," he said. "You will be asked to provide a written account of your decision-making." He said it without heat, without relish, the way you state a consequence that was already in motion before you arrived. "Right now, you are going to get in your vehicle, drive to the operations building, and personally ensure that every door Ms. Calder needs opened is open before she reaches it." If you've followed this story to this point, you already know what the next room is going to cost. Tell me in the comments, at what moment did you know this was bigger than the gate? Pruitt said, "Yes, sir." He meant it. That was the worst part. He finally, fully meant it. She parked the gray truck in the visitor slot closest to the operations building, the one marked "Reserved, Authorized Visitors Only," in faded yellow paint, and sat for a moment with the engine off. The installation was waking up around her. A formation was moving across the parade ground to the east. Boots on frozen ground, cadence called low in the cold air. A forklift moved pallets near the supply depot. Somewhere behind the maintenance building, a generator cycled on and settled into its rhythm. The mountain above everything was still in shadow. The sun not yet cleared the eastern ridge, and the air at this elevation had the particular quality of cold that is not wind but pressure. The weight of altitude sitting on everything at once. She got out of the truck. She had been here once before. Not to this installation. This installation had been built up in the 3 years since Hartwell, but to the forward planning annex that had preceded it, a collection of prefab structures in a valley 12 miles north that no longer appeared on any public map. She had driven to that annex on a Tuesday morning in early November, 14 months ago, with a flag report in a sealed folder and the specific documented certainty that the insertion sequence being planned for the following Thursday was going to fail. She had been right. She had also been 29 days from the end of her contract, which meant that when the internal review closed her complaint and attributed everything to weather and terrain, the separation paperwork that followed had the clean look of routine administration. It was timed well. She would give them that. What they had not timed well, what no one in that planning cell had calculated, was the operator who had been on the ground during the Hartwell extraction. The one who had spent 14 months writing and rewriting a statement he could not figure out how to submit without ending his own career. The one who had finally submitted it 8 weeks ago, named her, and named the flag, and named the officer who had looked at her report, and signed the closure without reading past the first page. She had not known about the statement until the IG contact called her. She had not cried when she heard. She had sat at the kitchen table in the house she was renting outside Billings and looked at the window for a long time, and then she had said, out loud, to no one, "All right." That was all. Now she crossed the parking lot with her field jacket zipped and her document case in her left hand and her eyes on the operations building entrance, where a staff sergeant had appeared in the doorway and was watching her approach with an expression that suggested he had been told something was coming, but not what it was. She walked at the same pace she always walked. The pace of someone who had already decided where she was going and did not need the arrival to announce itself. The staff sergeant's name was Okafor. He was 31, 12 years in, the kind of NCO who had survived 4 duty stations and 2 deployments by developing an extremely accurate sense of when a situation was above his pay grade and acting accordingly. This situation was above his pay grade. He had received a call from Colonel Stahl's aide 11 minutes ago. The call had been short. A reviewing officer will arrive at the operations building within the next 15 minutes. Ensure the main conference room is unlocked and that the planning cell archive access terminal is active. Do not discuss the nature of the visit with anyone below E7. The aide had paused before hanging up and then added, "And Sergeant, she will not need an escort." Okafor had unlocked the conference room. He had activated the archive terminal. He had told the 2 specialists working the front desk to take their morning break early and not come back until he called them. Then he had gone to the door. He watched her cross the parking lot. He had served alongside women in 2 of his 4 duty stations. He had a firm and uncomplicated belief, built from those years, that competence had no gender and that anyone who thought otherwise had simply not been in the right rooms. He did not know who this woman was. He did not know what she was here to review, but he knew, from the way she walked, from the document case, from the 11-minute gap between the call and her arrival that told him she had already been on the installation when Stahl called, that whatever was about to happen in the operations building was not going to leave things the way they were. She reached the door. "Ma'am," he said. He stepped aside. She stopped, looked at him directly. Sergeant Okafor. She had read his name tape. "Is the conference room open?" "Yes, ma'am." "Archive terminal active?" "Yes, ma'am." "Anyone else in the building right now above E6? He thought for a half-second. "Major Croft is in his office, ma'am. 2nd floor. She nodded. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, not alarm. Recognition. The name meant something to her, and what it meant had been anticipated. I do not think fear was the worst thing in that room. Fear, at least, is honest. What sat in the operations building that morning, behind a major's nameplate on a 2nd-floor door, inside a 14-month-old closure document filed without a full read, was not fear. It was the particular confidence of people who believe the thing they buried is going to stay buried. That confidence has a smell. It smells like a closed room. She walked inside. The door closed behind her. The mountain held its shadow over everything. Major Glenn Croft had been at this installation for 11 months. He had arrived 3 months after the Hartwell Canyon closure, transferred in from a garrison assignment in the southeast, a posting that had been framed in the orders as a lateral move, and that he had understood, without anyone saying so directly, to be a reward. Not a promotion. Not a commendation. A reward of the quieter kind. A new posting, a clean desk, and the institutional understanding that the thing he had signed his name to was finished. He had come to believe that. 11 months was long enough to build a belief on, if you did not look too hard at its foundation. He was at his desk when Okafor's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, the reviewing officer has arrived." Croft set down his coffee. "Send them up." "Sir, she has requested the conference room. She'll begin with the archive access. She asked me to inform all personnel above 04 that she will conduct individual interviews beginning at 1000. A pause that Croft could not prevent. "She," he said. "Yes, sir." He looked at the window. The mountain, the shadow still on the eastern face. "What's her name?" A beat on the intercom. "Calder, sir. Mara Calder." The coffee cup was still in his hand. He became aware of it, the warmth, the weight. In the specific way you become aware of an ordinary object when your body needs something to hold. He knew that name. He had known it for 14 months. The way you know the name of something you signed away. Not daily, not consciously, but as a residue, a background frequency that did not announce itself except in moments like this one. He had read her flag report on a Wednesday afternoon, skimmed the first page and the summary, decided the risk assessment was overcautious and the complaint procedurally premature, and signed the closure document before the end of the business day. The mission had gone Thursday. By Friday, 3 operators were in emergency extraction, and the sequencing error she had identified precisely in writing, with supporting terrain analysis, had produced the exact cascade she had described. He had written weather and terrain variables on the after-action summary himself. Now she was in the conference room below him, with IG liaison authority and an archive terminal and a document case, and individual interviews were beginning at 1000. It was 0749. He had 71 minutes. If you want more stories built with this level of detail and weight, keep the channel moving. The pinned comment is where you make that happen. He set the coffee down, picked up his phone, put it back down, picked it up again. There was no call to make. There was no version of the next 71 minutes that a phone call improved. He had understood this, somewhere beneath his confidence, for 11 months. He had simply not expected the understanding to arrive on a Tuesday morning with a name he recognized coming through an intercom. He stood up from his desk, sat back down. The mountain was still in shadow. The conference room was standard issue. A rectangular table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard with the ghost of a previous briefing still visible beneath the eraser marks. Phase 2, and in Noisette confirm. Window, 0400, 0600. And a single window that looked out on the parade ground. The archive terminal sat at the head of the table. A standalone unit, air-gapped from the installation's main network, accessible only through a 2-factor credentialing process that Mara completed in under 40 seconds. She did not sit down. She stood at the terminal and pulled the Hartwell Canyon file with the case number she had memorized 8 weeks ago. The night the IG contact called, when she had written it on the back of an envelope and then written it again on a notepad, and then put both in separate places in the house because she had not trusted herself to remember it correctly and had not been willing to risk being wrong about a single digit. The file opened. She read the cover index first. 14 documents. Operational plan, insertion sequence, terrain analysis, weather assessment, flag report. Her flag report, listed as Document 7 of 14, filed November 4th. Internal review findings, closure memorandum, after-action summary, 3 personnel transfer orders, and a final administrative notation dated 6 weeks after the closure. She opened Document 7. Her own words came back to her in the font of an official record. The proposed insertion sequence presents a sequencing vulnerability in the third phase transition. Terrain analysis of the northern approach corridor indicates a 340-meter exposure window not accounted for in the current plan. Recommend delay of 72 hours pending revised route confirmation or alternative entry point assessment. Risk level without revision, high. Below that, in the routing field. Received, Major G. Croft. Action, reviewed. Disposition, closed. Procedurally premature. Risk assessment non-concurrent with command assessment. Signed, dated. Time stamped at 16:47 on a Wednesday. The mission had launched at Oro 300 Thursday. She opened the after-action summary, found the paragraph that described the third phase transition. Read the phrase, weather and terrain variables, in the context of a sentence that was technically accurate in every word and false in its entirety. She had known it was there. She had been told it was there. Reading it was different from knowing it. She closed that document, opened the closure memorandum, read the signature block. She had a system for moments like this. Not a technique, not a method, just a habit she had built over years of operating in environments where the emotional and the operational could not occupy the same space at the same time. She noted what she felt, named it precisely, privately, in the way a field analyst names a variable, not to dismiss it, but to contain it. Then she set it aside and returned to the work. What she felt, reading Major Glenn Croft's signature on the closure memorandum, was something old and specific and entirely her own. She set it aside. She opened Document 13, Personnel Transfer Order, dated 4 months after the closure. Her name was in the header. Upstairs, Glenn Croft had made a decision. He was going down, not to the conference room. Not directly, not yet. But to Okafor's desk, where he would ask, in the casual register of a senior officer checking in on administrative matters, what the scope of the review covered and what documents had been requested so far. It was a reasonable thing for an officer in his position to do. It was technically within his authority. He told himself both of those things on the stairs. Okafor was at his desk when Croft reached the ground floor. The staff sergeant looked up, clocked the major's expression, and, with the accuracy of a man who had spent 12 years reading rooms, understood immediately what kind of conversation this was going to be and how he was going to have to navigate it. Major Croft. Sergeant. Croft kept his voice easy. The reviewing officer, she gets settled in all right? Yes, sir. Conference room. She's been in there about 20 minutes. What's she pulling from the archive? Okafor looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. Sir, I'm not in a position to share the specifics of the review access log without authorization from Colonel Stahl or the reviewing officer herself. Croft held the easy register. I'm not asking for a briefing, Sergeant, just a general, Sir. Okafor's voice did not rise, did not harden. It simply became a wall, politely constructed, solid, not going anywhere. I understand, but the Colonel was specific. Review access and document requests are restricted to the IG chain and above. I'd be happy to connect you with his aide if you'd like to request a formal update." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the building, a printer ran. The space heater in the front office ticked. I have watched silence win more fights than shouting ever did. Okafor was not fighting. He was simply standing in a doorway and declining to move, which is a different thing entirely and harder to argue with, and exactly the right call. Croft nodded once. "Fine, I'll reach out to the Colonel's aide." "Yes, sir." He turned and went back up the stairs. He did not contact the Colonel's aide. He went to his desk, sat down, and looked at the mountain. He had 11 months of clean desk, 11 months of distance, and somewhere in the conference room below him, a woman he had never met in person was reading his signature on a document he had signed in under 3 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon because the mission window was tight and the flag felt like procedural friction, and he had trusted his own read over hers without opening the terrain analysis she had attached. She had attached a terrain analysis. He had not read it. He sat with that for the first time, fully, without the buffer of institutional language, without the closure document between him and the fact of it. And it was worse than he had expected it to be. Outside, the sun finally cleared the eastern ridge. Light came down the mountain in a long, flat push and hit the operations building windows. And the shadow that had been holding over everything since Mara Calder drove through the gate lifted in a single quiet moment that nobody in the building was looking at. At 09:23, Mara requested a physical document from the archive's hard copy annex. Document 11, the terrain analysis, her own. The one attached to flag report, document 7, the one filed November 4th, the one Major Croft had not read before signing the closure. Okafor retrieved it personally, signed the custody log, and brought it to the conference room door. She opened it 6 inches, took the folder, said thank you, and closed it again. He stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed. The folder was 41 pages. He had seen the spine as he handed it over. He did not know what was in it. He knew it had been sitting in the hard copy annex for 14 months, signed into evidence storage on November 5th, the day after the flag report, and had not been checked out once in that time. Not once in 14 months. He went back to his desk. In the conference room, Mara set the folder on the table beside the terminal and opened it to the section she needed. Page 17, the Northern Approach Corridor overlay, which showed, in precise topographic detail, with measurement annotations in her own handwriting, the 340-meter exposure window. The window that was not in the operational plan. The window that the insertion sequence had moved through at 0347 on a Thursday morning in November. She had drawn this by hand from satellite imagery and ground truth reports from a source she had spent 3 weeks cultivating. She had attached it to the flag report with a cover note that said, plainly, see overlay, page 17. The exposure window is not terrain noise. It is a fixed geometric feature of the approach. It does not change with weather. It had not been read. She looked at page 17 for a long moment, not with anger. She had carried the anger for a long time, and it had not been useful, so she had put it somewhere and not gone back to it. She looked at it the way a builder looks at a load-bearing wall that was taken out by someone who did not know what it was holding. She photographed it with the IG-issue documentation camera, tagged it, added it to the evidentiary record she had been building since 0731, At 0958, she closed the document folder, opened the terminal, pulled the personnel file for Major Glenn Croft. At 1000 exactly, she opened the conference room door. Okafor looked up. "Sergeant Okafor," she said. "Please inform Major Croft that his interview is first." Okafor picked up the desk phone and dialed the extension for Croft's office. It rang once. "Sir, Ms. Calder is ready to begin. She's asked for you first." A pause on the other end that lasted exactly long enough to be a pause. "I'll be down," Croft said. Okafor set the phone down and looked at the conference room door. Closed again, Mara back inside, the room quiet behind it. He thought about the folder he had retrieved from the hard copy annex. 41 pages, unchecked for 14 months. He thought about the timestamp on the custody log, November 5th, and the timestamp on the closure document, which he had seen in the routing records often enough to know it by memory. November 5th as well, same day. Her analysis into evidence storage, his signature on the closure, same calendar date. He did not have the authority to draw a conclusion from that. He drew it anyway, privately, and filed it in the part of his mind where 12 years of service had taught him to keep the things he understood but could not yet say. The stairwell door opened. Croft came down in the deliberate way of a man managing his own gait. Not slow, not fast. The studied neutral of someone who has decided that the worst thing he can do right now is look like he is managing himself. He was in full uniform, squared away, the kind of turned-out appearance that was either habit or armor, and with Croft, Okafor had long suspected it was both. He stopped at the desk. "She say anything about the scope? Length of interview?" "No, sir." "Anyone else scheduled after me?" "She hasn't released a full schedule, sir. Just that you're first." Croft nodded. Looked at the conference room door. It was a standard door. Hollow core, institutional gray, a small wire glass window at eye level, through which nothing was currently visible because the interior blinds had been drawn. He had been behind that door for 100 briefings. It had never looked like this. He straightened his jacket, knocked twice. "Come in," she said. "If you were in that room, if you had watched what happened at that gate and you knew what was in that folder, tell me the moment you stopped feeling sorry for him." Comments are open. He opened the door and went in. Okafor did not move from his desk. He was very still, and the building was very quiet. And through the hollow core door, he could hear, faintly, at the edge of audibility, the sound of a chair being pulled out. Then nothing. She had arranged the room deliberately. 2 chairs at the near end of the rectangular table, not across from each other at the full length, which would have been formal and distancing, but at the corner, 90 degrees, close enough that there was no table between them as a buffer. A single yellow legal pad in front of her chair. The IG documentation camera on the table to her left. The terrain analysis folder, closed but present, centered on the table where he could see it. The archive terminal behind her, screen dark. She did not stand when he entered. She looked up from the legal pad, where she had written 3 lines, and gestured to the chair across the corner from hers. "Major Croft, thank you for coming down." He sat, looked at the folder, looked at the camera, looked at her. She let him look. She had been looked at by men in this kind of room before, the particular assessment of someone trying to determine how much she knew, calibrating their own position against an unknown variable. She was familiar with the calculation. She waited for it to finish. "For the record," she said, setting the pen down, "this interview is being conducted under IG Review Authority, case number 2247HC. You are not under investigation as a named subject at this time. You are being interviewed as a material witness to the planning sequence and closure process of the Hartwell Canyon operation. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said. "You are not required to have counsel present, but you are entitled to request it. Do you want to request it?" A beat. "No." "All right." She picked up the pen. "I want to start with November 4th. The day you received Flag Report Document 7. He had prepared for this. She could see it in the way he organized himself. The slight settling of the shoulders, the hands placed flat on his thighs, the breath taken and released before speaking. Preparation was not the same as readiness, but it looked similar from the outside. "I received the Flag Report that afternoon," he said. "I reviewed it in the context of the existing operational plan and the command assessment." "When you say you reviewed it," she said, "walk me through what that review looked like." He paused. "I read the summary and the risk designation." "The summary," she said, "not the attached terrain analysis." Another pause. Smaller, but there. The summary captured the key points. She opened the folder. Did not look at it. Looked at him. "Page 17, she said. "The northern approach corridor overlay. The 340-meter exposure window. The annotation in the lower right corner that says, and I am quoting directly, 'This is a fixed geometric feature of the approach. It does not change with weather.'" She paused. Did the summary capture that? The room was very quiet. Outside, the formation she had heard crossing the parade ground had finished. The generator behind the maintenance building ran its low, steady note. Somewhere in the building, a door closed on an upper floor, and the sound of it moved through the walls and arrived in the conference room as a faint vibration that both of them felt and neither of them acknowledged. "No," he said. "No," she said. "It did not." She wrote something on the legal pad. He could not see what it was. She did not intend for him to see what it was. The interview ran 47 minutes. She asked 14 questions. She asked them in a sequence that was not chronological. Not the order the events had happened, but the order in which the answers built on each other, each one narrowing the space available to the next. The way you walk a perimeter. Methodical, patient, closing the circuit. Croft answered all 14. He answered them honestly, which she had expected, because men like Croft, men who had made a bad decision quickly and then spent a long time building a structure of language around it, were generally relieved at the moment of formal accounting to stop building. The structure was exhausting. Honesty by the time it arrived was almost a rest. He told her he had read the summary and not the analysis. He told her the closure had been completed the same day because the mission window did not allow for a 72-hour delay review. He told her the command assessment had been confident and that he had weighted it over the flag because the flag came from an analyst he had not worked with before, and the command came from officers he had. He told her he had written weather and terrain variables in the after-action because the exposure window had, in fact, been traversed during a period of low visibility. and the phrase was technically accurate in describing the conditions. She wrote all of it down. At the end of the 14 questions, she asked one more, which was not on her legal pad. Major Croft, the analyst who filed Document 7, at the time you reviewed the summary, did her identity factor into your assessment of the flag's credibility? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. I don't know how to answer that honestly. That answer is honest, she said. She closed the legal pad, capped the pen. I want to tell you something outside the record, she said. He looked at her. The 3 operators from the Hartwell extraction. All 3 of them are still serving. One of them submitted the corroborating statement that opened this review. He did it knowing what it would cost him. She paused. He did it anyway. Croft looked at the terrain analysis folder on the table between them. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I wanted to say it out loud. She stood, extended her hand. He shook it, and the handshake was the strangest part of everything that had happened in that room, because it was genuine, and they both knew it, and neither of them knew quite what to do with that. He left. She sat back down. If you want this channel to stay sharp, independent, and consistent, and you want to know what happens when that folder reaches the general's desk, the pinned comment is where you make that happen. Outside the conference room window, the parade ground was empty now. The sun was fully up, the mountain's shadow entirely gone, the installation running its mid-morning routines with no visible sign that anything in it had changed, except that it had. She interviewed 6 people that day. Croft was first. After him, a warrant officer who had been in the planning cell on November 4th and had co-signed the operational plan without seeing the flag report. He had not known it existed, which was itself a finding. Then a master sergeant who had been on the Hartwell extraction and who sat across the corner from her with his hands folded on the table and answered every question in the flat, precise cadence of someone who had rehearsed not the answers, but the honesty, who had decided before he walked through the door that he was going to say the true thing, regardless of what it cost the institutional record. Then a captain who had drafted the after-action summary under Croft's direction and who had pushed back, once in writing, through a routing note that had been removed from the official file, but not from the archive terminal's revision history, which Mara had found at 0841 and tagged without comment. The revision history was document 15. There were only 14 documents in the official file index. She interviewed the captain for 31 minutes. At the end, she showed him the routing note on the terminal screen, his own words, his own time stamp, removed from the official record. He looked at it for a long time. I thought it was gone, he said. Revision histories don't delete, she said. They archive. He nodded. He already knew that. He had been hoping the person reviewing the file would not. The 5th interview was a logistics sergeant whose personnel file contained a transfer request submitted 10 months ago. Destination, the forward planning annex that no longer appeared on public maps, that had been denied without explanation. The denial had been signed by Croft. She interviewed him for 12 minutes. He left looking like a man who had just been told his luggage had been found after a long search and was waiting to feel the relief arrive. The 6th interview was Colonel Stahl. He sat across the corner from her in the same chair the others had used, uniform correct, posture the same as it was at the gate. No performance, no self-presentation, just presence. She asked him 4 questions. He answered all 4 completely and without hesitation, and did not ask what any of it meant for him personally, which told her what she needed to know about him. At the end of the 4th answer, she said, "Colonel, the delay at the gate this morning." I looked at her steadily. "It's in my report. I take responsibility for not having the gate personnel briefed on your access level before your arrival." "That's not what I'm asking about," she said. He waited. "I'm asking whether you want it in the IG record." A pause. "Your call," he said. "You're the reviewing officer." She looked at the legal pad. At the 6 sets of notes, 14 questions, and 5 more, and 4 more, and 12 minutes, and 31 minutes, and the revision history that was not supposed to exist. "It won't be in the IG record," she said. "It'll be in my personal notes. If the gate protocol needs review, that's an installation matter." Stahl nodded once, the nod of a man who understood exactly what had just been extended to him and intended to earn it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Brief your gate personnel." She finished at 16:34. 6 interviews, 41 pages of terrain analysis, 14 official documents, 1 revision history, 3 personnel files, and a logistics transfer denial that had been sitting in the archive for 10 months, waiting for someone with the access level and the case number to pull it. She packed the document case methodically. Camera, legal pads, the IG brief, her own notes in a separate folder she kept closed and face down at all times during the interviews. The terrain analysis folder she set on top, not inside the case. On top, because it was going with her as a physical exhibit, and she wanted it separate from everything else. Okafor knocked at 16:39. "Ma'am, can I get you anything before you head out? Coffee, water?" "I'm all right. Thank you, Sergeant." He started to go. "Okafor," he turned back. "The routing note, document 15, the captain's objection." "Yes, ma'am." "You knew it was there." He looked at her for a moment. "I've been running archive access for 9 months, ma'am. I know what's in the terminal." "And you didn't flag it." "It wasn't my authority to flag it, ma'am." She nodded. "It is now. If anyone requests modification or deletion access to the Hartwell file between now and when the IG report is finalized, you log it, timestamp it, and you call this number directly." She set a card on the table. "Not the installation chain, this number." He picked up the card, read it, looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." "You did good work today," she said. Not as a compliment, as a fact, delivered in the same register she used for everything else. He left. She zipped the document case, put on the field jacket, picked up the terrain analysis folder and the case, and walked out of the conference room and down the hall and through the front door of the operations building into the late afternoon cold. The mountain was fully lit now, the sun low and orange on the western face, the shadow pushed to the eastern valleys. The installation was running its end-of-day routines. Vehicles moving toward the motor pool, a formation dismissed on the parade ground, the generator behind the maintenance building cycling down for its evening check. The gate at the far end of the access road was visible from where she stood. The boom barrier, the guard shack, the light above the checkpoint just beginning to glow as the afternoon dimmed. She looked at it for a moment. Then she walked to the gray truck, put the case and the folder in the back seat, got in, and started the engine. She did not drive to the gate immediately. She sat in the parking lot with the engine running and the heat building slowly against the cold that had settled into the cab during the hours the truck had been sitting. The heater in this truck took 4 minutes to produce anything useful. She knew that. She had driven it for 3 years. She thought about the operator who had submitted the corroborating statement. She had not met him. The IG process kept them separated. His statement was in the record, his identity protected in the review documents under a witness designation code. She knew from the code that he was still active duty. She knew from the statement's language that he had written it alone, without legal counsel, which meant he had not fully understood what it might cost him until after he sent it. She thought about what it takes to do a thing like that, not the decision. Decisions were made in moments, and moments were cheap. She thought about the time between the decision and the send. The hours or days in which you hold the thing you are about to do and feel the full weight of what it will change, and then do it anyway, because the alternative is carrying the weight forever, and the weight does not get lighter. It only gets more familiar, and familiar is not the same as bearable. She knew something about that. She had filed her flag report on a Wednesday afternoon and driven back to her quarters and sat at the small desk and written in her personal log. The handwritten one. The one that was not official and would never be part of any record. A single line. I have said what I know. I cannot make them hear it. She had not written in that log since. Maybe she would now. The heater found its register. Warm air came through the vents, thin at first, then fuller. She pulled the field jacket tighter out of habit, then let it fall open as the cab temperature came up. Outside, through the windshield, she could see the operations building. Second floor, second window from the left. Croft's office. The light was on. He was still there. She did not know what he was doing up there. Writing his voluntary statement, maybe, or sitting the way she had sat at the kitchen table in Billings, looking at something that was not the window. She had meant what she said to him at the end of the interview. That it was honest. The not knowing. She had meant the handshake too. This was not about him in the end. It had never been only about him. She put the truck in drive. She drove the access road at 15 miles per hour. The installation moved past the windows in the amber light of late afternoon. The parade ground empty now, the maintenance building dark, the motor pool quiet, except for one mechanic running a final check on a utility vehicle with a flashlight clamped between his teeth. The access road curved once, then straightened, and the gate appeared at the end of it. The guard shack lit from inside, the boom barrier down, the light above the checkpoint orange in the dimming air. Torrance was at the window. He saw the gray truck coming and stepped out of the shack before it reached the barrier. He did not wait for her to stop at the window. He went to the manual override panel and raised the barrier while she was still 15 meters out. The boom lifting in its slow hydraulic arc. The same sound it had made that morning in reverse. A closing becoming an opening. A before becoming an after. She slowed anyway, stopped level with the shack. Torrance was standing beside it. He looked at her for a moment. The way young soldiers look at things they want to remember. Not studying, not analyzing, just holding the image with the specific attention of someone who understands that they are inside a moment that will mean more later. "Safe drive, ma'am," he said. She looked at him. Then at Delgado, visible through the shack window, who raised one hand, not a wave exactly, not a salute, something in between, the improvised gesture of someone who does not have the protocol for what they want to express. She nodded to both of them. Then she drove through. The barrier came down behind her. She did not watch it in the mirror. She watched the road, which went straight for half a mile before curving south toward the highway, and she drove it at 15 miles per hour until the installation's perimeter fence disappeared behind the tree line, and then she drove it at whatever speed the road asked for, and the mountain fell away behind her in the rear view, and the sky ahead was the particular dark blue that comes just before stars. I know what a room sounds like when respect arrives late. I know the specific register of it. Not loud, never loud, because by the time it arrives, it is already understood that volume was never the point. It sounds like a barrier going up before you reach it. It sounds like a hand raised through a window. It sounds like two words from a young soldier standing in the cold who has nothing to offer but the truth of what he witnessed and the decency to say something anyway. Late respect is still respect. It counts. If you want more stories that carry this kind of weight from the first second to the last, and you want to know what the IG report found when it reached the general's desk, support the channel through the pinned comment before you go. The IG report was filed 19 days later. 43 pages, not counting appendices. The terrain analysis, all 41 pages of it, was attached as Exhibit A. The revision history showing the captain's removed routing note was Exhibit B. The logistics transfer denial was Exhibit C. The interview transcripts ran to Exhibit G. The findings were not complicated. The language was careful and institutional, the way IG language always is. But the structure of it was simple. A flag report had been filed. A terrain analysis had been attached. The analysis had not been read. The mission had proceeded. The outcome the analysis predicted had occurred, and the subsequent closure had been completed in a manner that did not meet the standards of a thorough and impartial review. There was a second finding, shorter, in a subsection near the end. It concerned the separation of the reviewing officer from active service following her original complaint. The findings stated that the timeline and framing of the separation, reviewed against the internal communications recovered from the archive revision history, presented indicators of procedural irregularity that warranted further review by the appropriate personnel authority. That was the language. What the language meant, translated out of its institutional register, was this. They had pushed her out because she had been right, and the record now said so. Major Glenn Croft received a formal letter of reprimand. His promotion file was flagged pending the personnel authority review. He remained at the installation, a decision that Stahl had argued for, on the grounds that removing him immediately would disrupt ongoing operations and that the reprimand itself was sufficient signal to the institutional record. He was not wrong. The reprimand was entered into Croft's permanent file, where it would follow him to every subsequent assignment, every promotion board, every command consideration for the rest of his career. It was not nothing. Lieutenant Derek Pruitt received a formal counseling statement and a directed review of checkpoint protocol procedures. He was not removed from his post. He attended a 4-hour procedural training that he had requested himself, had walked into Stahl's office 3 days after the gate incident and asked for it directly, without prompting, which Stahl had noted in his own report as a mitigating factor and a signal worth watching. Torrance was not mentioned in any formal document. He did not need to be. The Personnel Authority review concluded 6 weeks after the IG report. It found, in language that was even more careful and even more precise than the IG findings, that the separation of Mara Calder from active service had been procedurally irregular in 3 specific respects, the details of which were contained in a classified annex that she received by secure courier on a Thursday afternoon in early spring. Sitting at the same kitchen table in the house outside Billings, where she had said, "all right," when the IG contact first called. She read the annex twice, set it down. The 3 irregularities, taken together, meant that the separation could be formally reclassified. Not reversed. She was not asking for reinstatement, had not asked for it and would not, but reclassified. The record would reflect that she had not left voluntarily. The record would reflect that the complaint she had filed had been procedurally valid and substantively correct. The record would reflect that her service, including the flag report and the terrain analysis, and the 14 months she had carried both of them in silence, was honorable in full. They were going to write it correctly. She sat with that for a while. Then she opened the handwritten log, the personal one, not official, never part of any record, to the page with the single line she had written on a Wednesday afternoon 14 months ago. "I have said what I know. I cannot make them hear it." She read it, picked up the pen. Below it she wrote, "They heard it." Closed the log, set the pen down. Outside the kitchen window, the early spring had come to the valley. Still cold, but with a particular quality of cold that is already surrendering, the ground beginning to give under it, the light staying a few minutes longer each evening. She looked at it for a while, the valley, the light, the season turning in the way seasons turn. Not in a moment, but in the accumulation of small changes that are invisible, until one day the thing is simply different, and you cannot point to the exact hour it happened. If you want the next episode to arrive stronger, and to know what Mara Calder was asked to do in the weeks after that courier arrived, the pinned comment is where that happens. Don't leave without it. She had 4 hours of driving tomorrow. She had already mapped the route. 3 months after the IG report was filed, the installation revised its checkpoint credentialing protocol. The new procedure ran 4 pages. It had been drafted by Lieutenant Derek Pruitt, reviewed by Colonel Stahl, and approved without modification. It covered non-standard authorization attachments, IG liaison credentials, and the specific chain of contact required when a presenting individual carried an access level that exceeded the gate's verification authority. It included a decision tree. Pruitt had drawn the first version by hand on a legal pad, sitting at the guard shack desk on a Saturday morning when no one else was there, and a contact list with direct numbers for the installation's legal office, the colonel's aide, and 3 numbers outside the installation that were to be called in sequence if the first 2 did not answer. The 4th number on the contact list began with an area code Pruitt now recognized immediately. He had briefed the new protocol to every soldier assigned to the checkpoint. He had done it himself in person, in sessions that ran longer than they needed to because he kept stopping to answer questions. Real questions, the kind that soldiers ask when they understand that the thing being explained matters beyond the paperwork. He did not tell them about the woman in the gray truck by name. He did not need to. The story had moved through the installation the way stories move through small, closed communities. Not by announcement, but by accumulation. Each telling adding a detail, each detail adding weight, until the shape of what had happened at the gate on that Tuesday morning was understood by everyone inside the wire without ever being made official. Torrance had been promoted to Specialist First Class 4 weeks after the IG report. The promotion had been in the pipeline before that morning. Stahl had signed it the same week he submitted his own report, and whether the timing was coincidence or intention was a question no one at the installation asked out loud. Torrance knew. He had read the new checkpoint protocol the day it was posted, had gone through the decision tree twice, alone, and then a third time with Delgado, walking them both through each branch. At the end of the third read-through, Delgado had said, "This is because of her, right?" Torrance had said, "All of it." They had not said anything else about it. They did not need to. The protocol was on the wall of the guard shack now, laminated, beside the checkpoint log and the space heater that still made its dying engines sound. It would be there for the next soldier assigned to this gate, and the one after that, and the one after that, each of them inheriting a procedure built from a Tuesday morning when a woman in a gray truck had waited 22 minutes in a secondary lane and not said a word more than she needed to. 1,200 miles away, in the valley outside Billings, a courier notification arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The operator, witness designation code in the IG record, name protected, still active duty, received his notification through the same secure channel. A separate document, not part of the public record. A summary of findings, the personnel authority conclusions, and a single line at the bottom of the cover page that had been added by the reviewing officer herself outside the formal template in a font that did not match the rest of the document because it had been typed separately and inserted manually. The line said, "Your statement made this possible. The record is correct now." He read it in his car, in a parking lot outside a base he was not allowed to name, on a lunch break he had almost skipped. He read it twice. Then he sat with both hands on the steering wheel for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, while the parking lot moved around him in its ordinary way. Vehicles coming and going, people walking to and from buildings, the unremarkable traffic of a day that had no idea what was happening inside one car parked near the far end of the lot. He did not cry. He had not expected to. He sat there for 22 minutes. He would not know that number until later, when he looked at the timestamp on the notification and the timestamp on the moment he finally put the car in drive, and understood, without anyone having to explain it to him, that the duration was not a coincidence, and that some things close the way they opened, in the same measure of time, in the same silence, waiting for a barrier to lift. There is a detail about the terrain analysis that did not appear in the IG report. It appeared in the appendix. Not Exhibit A, not the main body. The appendix, page 61. In a footnote that the reviewing officer had added during the final draft, because it was factual and relevant, and she could not find a reason not to include it, and because she had decided, somewhere in the 19 days between the interviews and the filing, that the record was going to be complete, or it was going to be nothing. The footnote read, "The terrain analysis attached as Exhibit A was completed over a period of 18 days prior to the flag report filing date. It incorporated satellite imagery, historical ground truth reports, and direct source consultation. The 340-meter exposure window identified in the analysis was independently confirmed by 2 of the 3 operators involved in the Hartwell Canyon extraction, both of whom stated in interview that the exposure was visible to them in real time during the 3rd phase transition, and that it was traversed because the plan did not account for it. 18 days. She had spent 18 days building the analysis that was read in under 3 minutes and dismissed before the last page. She had known, going in, that this was possible. She had known it the way field analysts know it. Not as abstract risk, but as lived reality. The accumulated knowledge of years in environments where the person with the most careful read of the ground is not always the person with the authority to change the plan. She had done the 18 days anyway. She had attached all 41 pages anyway. She had filed the flag anyway, in the full knowledge that it might be skimmed and signed away in an afternoon. Because the alternative was not filing it, and not filing it was never something she was going to do. I have very little patience for people who confuse quiet with weakness, but I want to say something else here, at this point in the story. Something I think about when I watch what the record finally said about those 18 days and the 41 pages and the flag report that cost her the career she had built and did not stop her from filing it anyway. Quiet is not the same as small. Discipline is not the same as submission. Waiting is not the same as losing. She filed the flag because she knew what the ground looked like. She filed it because 3 operators were going to move through a 340-meter exposure window on a Thursday morning at Oro 347. And she knew that, and she could not unknow it. And she could not let the document record say anything other than the truth about what she knew. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. The IG report was filed. The Personnel Authority review concluded. The record was corrected. The protocol was posted on the wall of the guard shack. The operator sat in his parking lot for 22 minutes. The laminated procedure inherited by every soldier who would ever work that gate carried, in its first page, a category of credential it had not known to account for. Before a Tuesday morning, when a woman in a field jacket and a worn ID arrived at a boom barrier and waited. She had said what she knew. They had heard it. The boom barrier at the main gate goes up in 4 seconds. It always did. That never changed. Not the mechanism, not the sound, not the 4 seconds. What changed was the laminated page on the wall of the guard shack beside the checkpoint log, and the decision tree on that page, and the 4th phone number on the contact list, and the soldier who reads the procedure now on their first day at this post and learns, before they learn anything else about this gate, that a credential they cannot immediately verify is not a credential they have the authority to dismiss. That is what changed. It does not sound like much. 4 pages of protocol, a laminated sheet, a phone number. It does not sound like 14 months of carrying a flag report that was signed away in an afternoon, or 18 days of terrain analysis built from satellite imagery and source consultation and the specific, unglamorous discipline of doing the careful thing when no one is requiring you to. It does not sound like the weight of a separation that was framed as voluntary and was not, or the 4 hours driven before sunrise on a Tuesday morning to a gate that was not expecting her, or the 22 minutes in a secondary lane in the mountain, cold, with both hands on the steering wheel and her eyes on a barrier that should already have been open. It does not sound like any of that, but it came from all of it. The protocol exists because she filed the flag. The flag exists because she built the analysis. The analysis exists because she looked at the ground and told the truth about what she saw, and she told it in writing. and she attached all 41 pages, and she sent it through proper channels on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing it might be skimmed and signed away before the end of the business day. It was. And then, 14 months later, it wasn't anymore. In the house outside Billings, the handwritten log sits on the kitchen table. The last 2 entries are on the same page, separated by 14 months of silence and 1 courier notification and 1 Thursday afternoon in early spring. I have said what I know. I cannot make them hear it. They heard it. That is the whole record. Everything else, the IG report, the personnel authority findings, the formal reclassification, the letter of reprimand in a major's permanent file, the new procedure on the wall of a guard shack in the mountains. Everything else is the institutional translation of those 2 lines. The first written in the flat certainty of someone who has done the right thing and cannot control what happens to it. The second written in the same hand 14 months later, in the same kitchen, with the same pen. She did not celebrate. She did not make calls. She closed the log, set the pen down, and looked at the valley for a while. Then she mapped the route for the next morning. 4 hours, same road, different gate. She always mapped the route. If this story stayed with you, if you know someone who filed the flag and was not heard, or who waited in the secondary lane and did not brake, then don't leave without helping the next one exist. The pinned comment is where that happens. What you do there keeps this channel moving. Some records take time to correct. The important ones always get corrected.